Today we're continuing our work on this Mac Pro 200mm chef knife. Last time we did some light modifications to it, so if you haven't seen that yet, I'll leave a link in the description. But in today's video, I'm going to be going over the design, the concept art, and making the mask for the etching process. So let's get into it. It's a new blade shape for me, and it's also a lot thinner than I'm used to working, so I'm going to save myself a bit of a headache by working directly on the profile of the blade. And this one is nice and flat, so I can just trace it without having to get fancy. And if you're wondering why I don't just use a picture, it's because there's lens distortion when I do that, and if I'm not perfectly above it, there's also a bit of tilt distortion. I can avoid both of those problems by just scanning it into my computer, but I have the added benefit that when it comes into my work file, it's already at the correct dimensions. Once inside of Inkscape, I could just do a technical trace of it, so I'm not going to use my stylus to draw it out. I'm just going to set nodes with my mouse and skew them all into the right positions. I want this profile to be as exact as it possibly can be. As for the scallops, I actually just kind of eyeballed them. I wanted to generally know where they were so that I could work around them, but at this point I wasn't really sure that I would need to know precisely where they would be, so I just didn't bother. I drew out the whole knife for my Mac review, but I didn't record that. So without further ado, we'll get into the sketches. To get started, I just wanted to jot down the raw idea from my head, and what I pictured was some sort of sea monster, stormy waves, and a boat. And you can tell from this beautiful sketch that I captured it perfectly on the first go. Honestly, there's no reason to even keep watching. For real though, this is about what I expected to see at this point. With this simple base drawing done, I can really start to problem solve and hone in on different things that I want to tackle. In the next two sketches, I start to play around with the water itself and how I'm going to frame the artwork on the knife. And I'm really just exploring right now, nothing is set in stone. I'm just going to sketch out a couple ideas and see which ones I like the best. After that, I started to think about how the waves would interact with the sea monster itself, and how I was going to go about adding detail, but keep the piece readable. And for the first time, really, I'm starting to think about what the sea monster itself looks like. There were two basic forms that I wanted to explore, and that was an octopus and a sea serpent, or some sort of large eel. And while I sketch them out, I'm really just thinking about the overall composition of the piece, not any of the specific details on the creatures. Like, the way that they actually look is a bit of a placeholder. The only thing I really care about is one is a big long noodle, and the other one's got tentacles. So as I look at these images, I'm really just looking at the big, large shapes and the story that they're telling. I spent a lot of time deliberating this because the sea monster really is the focal point of the piece. And the more I drew both forms, the harder it got to decide. So I took a break from my computer and moved to my sketchbook. I started thinking about the designs for each type of monster, and you can see that I went in a bunch of different directions. And it was at this point that I realized that the octopus form really wasn't going to work for me. It's just that the work area is very small, and I want to be able to show a lot of detail on the creatures. If I went with the octopus, I'd have to sacrifice detail for a really strong silhouette because all of the limbs would be very small on the knife. In contrast to that, with the sea serpent, I can coil it in on itself and make a big shape that I can bring really close to the camera. I say camera, but I mean the viewer. And I was thinking about rendering all the scales and teeth and all of those kinds of things. So for this project, I'm going to go with the sea serpent. It's just a better fit for the shape. But if you want to see this octopus design come back, leave a like or a comment or something. I might honestly forget about it and it could get lost in the shuffle. But I think it would look really cool on a blade without scallops, so that I've got a bit more space to work with. With the body shape settled on, I started thinking about the head of this creature. Up until now, I've just been putting like a generic dragon head on it. And it's fine, it looks good. It's even kind of traditional for this kind of sea serpent, but I like the idea of making it more fishy. Plus, I owe it to myself to explore all the options. I tried some stuff that was kind of amphibious and then more fishy stuff, but I'm still not going to settle this yet. I'm just going to keep this stuff in the back of my mind. Moving back onto my computer, I kept playing around with the shape of the body, but I spent a lot more of my time thinking about the waves and how all of these different layers were going to interact with each other. My main thing is that I wanted to create depth within the water, but I didn't want it to become overwhelming and too noisy. And for the longest time, I kept trying to make like 3 or 4 layers of water work, but I really wasn't nailing down a look that I liked. For one thing, I was having a lot of trouble making the waves feel stormy and like very large and chaotic. I have waves in these drawings, but across the plane of the blade, it's pretty flat overall. But I kept experimenting and eventually I came up with this. And these were the first waves that I really liked the feeling of. It felt like it was starting to come together, so I shifted back to the sea monster to try to nail down its pose, and then I would be ready to mash it together with these waves. Oh, and I'm not really worried about the boat at all. It's going to be really small on this design, so as long as it's got a strong silhouette, I can just pop it in wherever it feels right. At this point, I'm really excited, but I'm also very nervous about how small all of these details are going to be. So even though the design isn't finalized, I inked the drawing and I did my first test cut. I didn't want to worry about details if these basic lines weren't even going to cut properly. And taking a look at it, it actually looks great. So I went back in and I started adding scales. And I'm not going to push my luck, so I'm doing another test cut. And these actually came out pretty nicely as well. So I was able to forge ahead with a lot more confidence and I kept refining the design. I'm basically looking to maximize the readability of the entire drawing. When I first went in with the shading on the scales, I think I made the serpent a little too dark and it started to blend in with the waves a little bit too much. So I ended up pulling back a little bit and hinting at scales in certain areas. And it kind of gave it a feel of highlights, even though I can't actually make real highlights. And I just kept working away at it until we got to this. It's possible that minor things will change, but this, for the most part, is the idea. And even though I'm feeling pretty good about it on my screen, I still don't want to screw up an expensive knife. So as always, I'm going to make the concept art so that I can get a better idea of how the design is going to look on steel. The concept art is basically how I prototype my ideas. And it's really nerve-wracking to work on a knife in the first place. The last thing I want to do is go in without confidence in my design. It's been cool watching how the art style for the concept art has changed over time. When I first started doing it, it was purely to be internal. I just wanted to test out my ideas and make sure I wasn't going to screw up a blade. But then I started showing them on Instagram, and I'm including them in orders, and I think that's just been pushing me to refine them more and more. And I've said it before, but painting these concepts is like one of my favorite parts of the process. At the end of the day, I'm an artist first, and I miss having opportunities to paint. So yeah, I think going forward I'm going to be spending more time on them like I did with this one. Earlier on, I said that I wanted the sea monster to be the focal point of the image. And I think I really pulled it off here. Whenever I glance at the design, I'm drawn immediately to the head with that large eye and those sharp teeth. And with the strong silhouette of the ship standing on its own, it's the second thing I see, and the entire story of the image comes together. I think this one's gonna look really cool. I did go in and make some tweaks to the silhouette of the sea monster, but other than that, everything was great. And the only thing left to do is to create the official mask. I use glossy permanent vinyl for all of my projects. It's a little thicker than the matte stuff, which helps with the points and the edges, and the permanent adhesive gives me extra peace of mind. I have successfully used matte temporary vinyl for etching, but it became kind of brittle when it was in the acid for a while. I still use it for backing sometimes, but I never really use it for my actual design anymore. Anyways, it comes on long rolls and I cut them down to 4" by 12" strips. And what I basically want to do is sandwich the knife between 2 of these. I want it to be centered vertically, but I want less space near the point. That way I've got a lot of extra vinyl to come up and cover the handle. And I'll run the machine one last time. And there we have it. The mask is all ready for the process. In my next video, I'll weed it, apply it to the knife, and do the actual etch. So subscribe if that sounds cool, and I'll see you next time. Oh yeah, and I just passed 10 subscribers here on YouTube, so I just want to say thank you very much to everyone who's subscribed so far. You hear everyone say it, but I really didn't realize how much work these videos would be before I started making them. So yeah, you're all wonderful people, and I hope you have a lovely day.